2016. I can't remember the exact date when that specific decision was taken, but the decision is one that reflects the judgment of the British people.
Mr. David Jones.
My right honourable friend agree that maintaining the integrity of our country requires that there should never be any internal borders, economic or otherwise, within the territory of the United Kingdom?
Yes, he's absolutely right.
David Simpson.
Speaker, the Secretary of State will know that this party and the businesses in Northern Ireland have advocated a sensible Brexit deal with Northern Ireland. But would he also agree that those that could risk everything because of their intransigence is the Republic of Ireland, and they could lose the biggest out of this?
He's asking me to break my vow of courtesy, so I'll say get thee behind me, Satan, for this time anyway.
Paul Masterton.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that if regulatory alignment in certain specific areas is a requirement to solve the Northern Ireland border issue, then protecting the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom requires that solution to be adopted UK-wide?
What I'll say to him is that every approach we take will treat the whole of the United Kingdom as a single constitutional entity and a single economic entity.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday our Prime Minister was humiliated by having the rug pulled from under her by the DUP, and even wasn't she naive to attempt to do a deal of the sort that she tried to do, knowing that the DUP would inevitably veto it. So, with the negotiations in such fantastic hands, will he now admit that the only way of moving forward without a hard border in Northern Ireland to protect the jobs of my constituents is for us to stay in the customs union and the single market?
Stay.
No.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, this urgent question is spectacularly badly timed in the middle of talks to move to the next phase. And the truth is that...
Order. The honourable gentleman will resume his seat. The honourable... Order. Order. I'll deal with this. The honourable gentleman... Order. The honourable gentleman is unfailingly courteous. He is entitled to criticise a member for submitting a question. It's not for the honourable gentleman to question the judgment of the chair. I took the view that this matter warranted the attention of the House of Commons today. If the honourable gentleman wishes to depart from that view, he shouldn't express it on the floor of the House. If he's got a serious question to ask, I'm happy to hear it, but I seek his assurance that he's not arguing the toss with the chair. Mr. Richard Graham.
I would never dream to do that, Mr. Speaker, but my point was that many, if not most, negotiations come good towards the end. And therefore, rather than sledging the government, I urge the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister to maintain their resilience and patience and see this through, which will require compromises on all sides to reach a good solution.
Thank you. Secretary of State.
He makes a very good point.
Chukaramuna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State talks about the will of the people, but of course he put leaving the customs union and the single market to the electorate at the general election, and they lost their majority. Can I ask him a very specific question? Clearly, there is not a consensus to have an arrangement where only Northern Ireland is part of the single market and the customs union. And no business or government I've spoken to thinks technology is the answer. He has said he doesn't think keeping the UK overall in the customs union and the single market is the answer. What does he believe is?
A comprehensive free trade agreement, a customs agreement, and all the associated regulatory alignment. Now, while I'm on my feet, I'll just pick him up on the result of the general election. I'll remind him, 85% of the people in this House were elected on manifestos which said, leave the European Union.
Mr. Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will of course be aware that the UK has a large surplus in services with the EU. Does he agree with me that for the continued success of legal, professional and financial services post-Brexit, not only mutual recognition but UK-wide regulatory alignment with the EU will be necessary for that success?
If he means by alignment then mechanisms such as mutual recognition, then yes, I agree entirely.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am, though, slightly confused now because yesterday the government seemed to accept the principle that the only way to achieve no border or a soft border in Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland was to achieve regulatory alignment. Does that principle today now still stand, that they accept that principle is the only way to deliver that frictionless border?
Secretary of State.
Well, I can understand her confusion if she hasn't been listening for the last half an hour. The simple truth is that what we will need to do is establish arrangements whereby we get the same or similar outcomes for some areas of industry and some areas of service. No more, no less.
Andrew Mearison.
What can be done to help our good friend, the Irish government, climb down from the position that it was unwittingly misled in adopting yesterday?
Secretary of State.
What I'll say to my honourable friend, right honourable friend, I think, is the aim of this negotiation is together to get to an outcome which serves our interests, the EU 27's interests, and particularly Ireland's interests, because, as he says, they are our good friends and they are the people who are in some ways closest to us.
Mr. Gavin Newlands.
Mr. Speaker, if the Secretary of State is so confident that we in this place, the media and the general public, are misinterpreting what may or may not have been in the draft agreement, will they publish it to clear things up?
Secretary of State.
I can't imagine he thinks that would advance the negotiations one jot.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The EU Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, has today tweeted that when we leave, our existing free trade agreements with the EU will not be rolled over, which is obviously an extremely significant point. And therefore, further to the question from our fellow member for Carlisle, does it not add weight to at least considering those trade models where we are able to negotiate our own trade deals globally, but remain a member of those that EFTA currently has?
Well, there's more than one benefit from departing from the European Union. One of them is the trade arrangements, and I have to say we are well advanced in our plans for dealing with those ongoing trade arrangements and making sure that we do roll them over.
Albert Owen.
Speaker, yesterday for the first time the Secretary of State realised the importance of the Irish border issue extends beyond the island of Ireland. Will he, moving forward, to unite the United Kingdom, meet with the Scottish First Minister, the Welsh First Minister, to talk about regulatory alignment, because it impacts on everyone? If he wants to unite this United Kingdom, he has to do better.
Well, in response to his first half of his question, I just recommend he goes back and reads some Hansards of my statements here. It proves he's absolutely wrong. It's quite a calumny, really. And as for the First Ministers, well, actually there's a thing called the Joint Ministerial Committee, which meets with representatives of all of the devolved administrations on a regular basis. Sadly, the Northern Ireland Executive is not there at the moment, which is one of the difficulties we have to deal with.
Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker, we leave the EU in 16 months' time. Will my right honourable friend assure the House and the country that the EU delegates are well aware that we are preparing to fall back on WTO rules if negotiations fail?
I think that's been apparent for some time.
Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you. Does the Secretary of State think that it furthers the cause of the Union to refer to the actions of the First Minister of Wales and the First Minister of Scotland as foolish, as he did a moment ago? They're not foolish. When it comes to the single market and the customs union, they are absolutely right.
Yeah, perhaps he wants to give advice to them as to how they describe other people.
Bob Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the big prizes to be gained from being free of the European Union is to enable us, as a United Kingdom, to negotiate our own free trade deals across the world. Will my right honourable friend confirm that nothing in these agreements is going to fetter our ability to do that?
Tuesday.
Yes.
Dear Hobhouse.
Mr. Speaker, will he accept that leaving the customs union was not on the ballot paper on the 23rd of June 2016?
What was said earlier was that nobody voted for that. Nobody knew this was a consequence. In fact, both sides of in the referendum campaign made it absolutely plain. Departure from the union meant departure from the customs union.
Chris Bell.
given that in European negotiations nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, does the Secretary of State agree that any concessions we may now make are contingent on reaching a satisfactory end-state free trade deal in the future?
Stay.
Yes, he's right. In every European Union negotiation, that phrase, nothing is agreed till everything is agreed, is a mantra, and it matters. Yeah.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, can the Secretary of State tell us the difference between regulatory convergence and regulatory alignment?
Stay.
One's about harmonisation, one's not.
The Secretary of State said one's about harmonisation and the other's not. Somebody was suggesting he or she couldn't hear. Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State confirm that in these negotiations the government still aims to conclude an agreement on an implementation phase as early as possible in the new year, and that agreement would similarly benefit the European Union?
Tuesday.
Yes, he's exactly right on both counts.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So despite trying to cave in every EU ask so far, this government has not been able to conclude the preliminary negotiations in 18 months, and we're to believe they'll conclude the substantive negotiations in 15 months. They haven't been able to agree a good deal with the DUP, but yet we're to believe they'll get a good deal from the 27 member states. It's so obvious they don't know a good deal from a bad deal, and we're heading to a no-deal scenario. So when we start doing some planning and present transparent information and the implications of that?
Tuesday.
The Honourable Gentleman seems to be having an argument with himself in that question. It's 7 months of negotiation so far, and it will be concluded.
Robert Halfon.
Could I ask the Secretary of State just to where is the government in terms of our post-club membership of handing over a bill to the European Union? And also what is the amount that's being decided? Is it 40 billion, 50 billion, or more or less?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be drawn on numbers at the moment, but we are pretty close to alignment on that.
Darren Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Irish issue has never been about wandering cows or static cameras. It has been what's behind me, that we have more in common. The Irish are our closest neighbours, and that is the basis of the Good Friday Agreement, which is very disappointing that the Secretary of State did not mention in his opening statements. I repeat the same question I have asked the Secretary of State, the Prime Minister and other ministers 6 times since January. When will the Prime Minister show courtesy to the people of Northern Ireland and put a date in her diary to at least visit? If she had been there and listened and talked to people, she might not have ended up in the farce which was yesterday.
Well, let's start with the opening of her question. She says we didn't mention the Northern Ireland Agreement. I'll read the paragraph from my opening statement. In particular, on the issue of Northern Ireland, we've been clear we want to protect all elements of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement to maintain a common travel area and to protect associated rights. So much for that.
Michael Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the noise coming from many on the benches opposite, is it not right that actually at this stage of the talks we're closer to an agreement than we ever have been, and that is a good thing? Progress has been made, and that we should want to move on to talks about trade which will be in our national interest and also in the EU's interest as well?
Yes, it's exactly right. That's pretty much what Jean-Claude Juncker said yesterday.
Lady Herman.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for calling me. While I readily accept that there are 10 members of the DUP in this House, duly elected, the DUP, nevertheless, do not speak for all of the people of Northern Ireland. They do not represent all the people of Northern Ireland. So would the Secretary of State for Brexit just take a few moments to explain to this House, and particularly to all of the people of Northern Ireland and to the rest of the United Kingdom, the benefits of the proposals for the whole country, which the Prime Minister was taking to Brussels yesterday? I was profoundly embarrassed on her behalf.
The aim for the whole country, as she says, is to maximise the trade benefits of being outside the customs union and single market, whilst at the same time maintaining as much as possible of the benefits that we currently enjoy. Now, that's the aim, and that's what we're heading towards, and I'm pretty confident it's what we'll achieve.
Catherine McKinnell.
It's increasingly clear to anyone watching that the government is incapable of focusing on anything but Brexit, and even then is making a complete horlicks of it. So what reassurance can the Secretary of State give that the government is ready to put country before party, not just on this border issue, but on our crucial trade negotiations with the EU and the rest of the world.
Secretary of State.
I know it's Horlick's a parliamentary word, Mr. Speaker. I'll use it in future myself. And of course, I am the Brexit Secretary, so it is what I focus on most of the time. But the simple fact is, the free trade agreement she talks about is precisely what we're aiming for. It's exactly what we and Brussels want to get to as quickly as possible.
The word is certainly not unparliamentary. It could be said to constitute a form of advertising, but it is not disorderly. Or indeed a euphemism, as the right honourable gentleman pertinently observes from a sedentary position. Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Speaker, when will we have a decision on the rights of EU nationals in the UK, who the Secretary of State has yet again forgotten about amidst the current chaos? There are more than 3 million people who are in limbo as to their future rights, including many Irish citizens to whom we have a particular and long-standing duty.
Secretary of State.
And we recognise that duty. Indeed, I have said from this dispatch box we view it as a moral imperative. And we've made plain that we are doing everything possible to ensure that they carry on their lives as they do now. We've made that plain. I really wish the honourable gentleman wouldn't frighten people by taking the opposite view.
Stephen Timms.
But the customs union wasn't on the ballot paper at the referendum. The Prime Minister was right yesterday to be willing to sign up to regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the EU. From his answers today, the Secretary of State, I think, is suggesting that regulatory alignment should apply to the UK as a whole. Will he confirm that is the point that he's making and explain how he sees that being delivered?
Well, of course, the referendum question was a short question, but it was a very long campaign. And in that campaign, both sides made it plain that being outside the union meant being outside the customs union and outside the single market. Both sides made it, and I can point him, if need be, to the television programmes upon which it was said. What I've explained to the House is regulatory alignment is not harmonisation. It's a question of ensuring similar outcomes in areas where you want to have trade relationships and free and frictionless trade. And anything we agree for Northern Ireland in this respect, if we get our free trade area, will apply to the whole country.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Secretary of State just confirm today that Brexit is the easiest thing in human history? And if it is, how is it that this government is incapable of making it so?
As you can see, it's a complete cinch. Yes.
Mrs. Ellen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the British people voted to leave the European Union, but the common market is extremely popular with the public. We joined the customs union in 1973. Not only would staying in it help to resolve the Irish issues, it would also boost British exporters across the country.
Here. State.
I'll say to the honourable lady that if it had been still a common market, I suspect the vote might have been different.
Mr. Speaker, he says a vote to leave was a vote to leave the single market and customs union, but that is not what leavers said. He said that the Conservative manifesto committed to pulling us out of both, but that's not what the majority of the public voted for. Isn't it time to accept he will have a majority in this House for a Brexit based on membership of the single market and the customs union, but we will never give him a majority for a destructive hard Brexit?
Straight.
Nobody wants a majority for a destructive Brexit. We want a majority for a constructive Brexit.
Andrew Henry.
Speaker, the Prime Minister pushed the Secretary of State to one side to take personal responsibility for leading the negotiations yesterday. Why is she not here today to update the House? Did Arlene Foster say no?
Stay.
I don't know. You complain when I come, you complain when I don't come. I mean...
Mr. Peter Kyle.
Here. Mr. Speaker. The choices the Secretary of State has made has led him into a cul-de-sac where he now has to make a choice between honouring the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement or pleasing the right-wingers on his own side and the DUP. Which choice is he going to make?
Stay.
I'm going to make the choice that preserves everything in the Good Friday Agreement and also ensures that we preserve the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for proving yesterday that he can listen and that when he tells Europe no, he means no. and we thank you on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland for that matter. We'd also take the opportunity, at the next available opportunity, to speak to the Dublin Government and to let them know that if they continue down this reckless path, they will end up stomping up a further £1.5 billion in membership fees to the European Union if they do not get a trade deal with us. Better move to a trade dealer sooner rather than later.
As I said before, I'm not going to go in for any tit for tat with other governments. But what I will say to him is this. He's absolutely right. The best outcome for Ireland is a free trade deal and a customs agreement. That will preserve by far and away the largest portion of their trade and protect their economy. And that's what we're trying to do.
Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's events were a shambles that must undermine our credibility in our negotiations with the EU. However, if there is two positives out of it. It's first the belated recognition of this government of the importance of regulatory realignment or alignment with Europe in order to go forward, and secondly, the display of unity with all parts of the United Kingdom in demanding that what is good for one is good for all of them. Will the Minister recognise the logic of that and change his position and negotiate on the basis of access to the single market and the customs union?
Firstly, he does not need to point out to a member of the Conservative and Unionist Party the importance of the United Kingdom. Secondly, it does not require membership of the single market. As far as I remember, we were a union of the United Kingdom well before we were a member of the single market.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, the Article 50 was designed to be harsh on the country that it's triggered it. And the author of it, Mr. Giuliano Amato, the former Italian Prime Minister, described it as a clause, a safety valve that was there but never to be used. Aren't we setting an unrealistic timescale, and isn't it time for us to seek to delay the implementation of leaving the European Union so that we can resolve issues around the customs union and the single market?
No, I don't agree with him, and if I give him one piece of advice about negotiations, it's don't give up before you start.
Alex Sable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Arlene Foster now seems to be running the rule over the government's EU exit negotiations, do we expect a member of the DUP bench to be joining his team on a confidence and supply arrangement? No.
Perhaps he should. Perhaps you'd offer that question over there, not over here.
You need to offer that.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State says he's serious about delivering the best for the United Kingdom and that he thinks that Brexit is a cinch. So, if the EU Commissioners estimate there are currently 142 areas of North-South cooperation that depend on EU law, is the plan for Northern Ireland to remain aligned in each of these 142 areas or more widely?
Firstly, she should not take sarcasm as a fact. The second thing I'd say to her is the 142 areas do not all rely on EU law. I'm afraid she's factually wrong.
Paul Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Presuming that the government does at some stage finally make progress, if we do leave the single market, can the Secretary of State outline to the House what sort of agreement he expects to reach for UK access to the European market for services?
I would expect that too. But, well, firstly, we have made a lot of progress. The question at the moment this week is sufficient progress. That's the first thing. Second thing, and that, by the way, I'm quoting Jean-Claude Juncker again. Excuse me. With respect to his substantive question, we would expect the free trade agreement to include a services section.
Daniel Zeichner.
My honourable friend, the member for Hammersmith, rightly raised the issue of citizens' rights. There are thousands of people in my constituency worried about their future, millions across Britain and the European Union. Last year we were told this would be sorted out swiftly and quickly, it would be simple. It turns out it's much more complicated. Couldn't the Minister tell us what the position now is in relation to jurisdiction by the European Court of Justice?
That's one of the elements that was being discussed this week, and I think the main aim here is not the ECJ jurisdiction. It's a question of getting the treatment of both British citizens and European citizens to be symmetrical, to be similar.
Thank you. Order. Statement the Secretary of State for the Home Department, Secretary Amber Rudd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a statement on David Anderson's report published today on recent terrorist attacks in London and Manchester. The attacks which took place this year shocked us all. Our thoughts remain with the victims of the attacks and all those affected by them. And I'm conscious that many will still be suffering acutely. However painful, it is essential that we examine what happened so that we can maximise the chances of preventing further attacks in the future. At the outset, I would like to remind honourable members of the context. Andrew Parker, the Director General of MI5, recently said that we are facing a dramatic upshift in terrorist threats. And as the so-called caliphate in Syria and Iraq has weakened, Daesh has increasingly turned its attention to encouraging people to launch attacks in their home countries. Indeed, there is simply more terrorist activity, partly inspired and also enabled by terrorist propaganda and instructional videos online. Plots are developing more quickly from radicalisation to attack, and threats are becoming harder to detect, partly due to the challenge of accessing communications that are increasingly end-to-end encrypted. MI5 and counter-terrorism policing are currently running well over 500 live operations, a third up since the beginning of the year, involving roughly 3,000 subjects of interest. In addition, there are over 20,000 further individuals or closed subjects of interest who have previously been investigated and may again pose a threat. So I'd like to pay tribute to MI5 and the police who work tirelessly to keep us safe. I can announce today that they have now disrupted 22 Islamist terrorist plots since the murder of Lee Rigby in May 2013, including 9 since the Westminster attack in March this year. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the reviews. Counter-terrorism policing and MI5 have conducted a thorough review process. I received from them 10 highly classified documents which analyse the attacks and potential improvements to operational practices. In June, I commissioned David Anderson, QC, to provide independent assurance of an external challenge to the reviews. And I'm today placing a copy of his unclassified assessment of the reviews in the House Library, and copies will also be made available in the Vote Office. David Anderson concludes that the reviews have been carried out in an, quote, impressively thorough and fair manner, and he endorses, so far as he feels qualified to do so, the conclusions and recommendations. Based on the MI5 and police reviews, David Anderson explains that, in the case of the Westminster attack, Khalid Massoud was a closed subject of interest at the time of the attack. Neither MI5 nor the police had any reason to anticipate the attack. Regarding the Manchester Arena attack, Salman Abedi was also a closed subject of interest at the time of the attack, and so not under active investigation. In early 2017, MI5 nonetheless received intelligence on him, which was assessed as not being related to terrorism. In retrospect, the intelligence can be seen to be highly relevant. Had an investigation been reopened at the time, it cannot be known whether Abedi's plans could have been stopped. MI5 assess that it would have been unlikely. Across the attacks, including Manchester Arena, David Anderson notes that MI5 and CT policing got a great deal right. However, in relation to Manchester, he also commented that, quote, it is conceivable that the attack might have been averted had the cards fallen differently. In the case of London Bridge, Khurram Butt was an active subject of interest who had been under investigation since mid-2015. A number of different investigative means were deployed against him, but they did not reveal his plans. His 2 conspirators had never been investigated by MI5 or CT policing. In regards to Finsbury Park, neither MI5 nor the police had any intelligence about this attack. Taken as a whole, MI5 and CT policing conclude they could not, quote, find any key moments where different decisions would have made it likely that they could have stopped any of the attacks. Nonetheless, they go on to make a total of 126 recommendations. The recommendations made in the MI5 and police operational review fall into 4 broad categories. First, there needs to be a concerted effort to enhance MI5 and the police's ability to use data to detect activity of concern and to test new approaches in the acquisition, sharing and analysis of data. Second, MI5 should share its intelligence more widely and work with partners such as local authorities on how best to manage the risk posed by closed subjects of interest in particular. We are considering undertaking multi-agency pilots in a number of areas, including Greater Manchester, and I've already started discussing how to take this forward with Andy Burnham. Third, there should be a new approach to managing domestic extremism, particularly extreme right-wing groups, where their activity meets the definition of terrorism. Fourth, there are a large number of detailed and technical changes which could be made to improve existing operational counter-terrorism processes. David Anderson ends his report with several reflections. First, that intelligence is imperfect and investigators are making tough judgments based on incomplete information. This, unfortunately, means that not every attack can be stopped. As we do not live in a surveillance state, it will always be a challenge to law enforcement to stop determined attackers getting through. Despite this, we should remember that most attacks continue to be successfully disrupted. Lastly, David Anderson concludes that even marginal improvements are capable of paying dividends that could tip the balance in favour of the security forces in future cases. Mr. Speaker, I have discussed these reviews at length with David Anderson and separately with Andrew Parker and the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, as well as their senior teams. I'm grateful.